This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 4 minutes after 10. A very good morning indeed to you. The UK-EU summit currently taking place in London appears to have delivered a deal. It's rather more than a trade deal in many ways. And yet, of course, much of the coverage in this country, this curious country, will still focus upon failure to understand anything. I mean, if you're going to quote Suella Braverman or Kemi Badenoch or Nigel Farage, they should be forced to wear around their neck little placards containing some of the words that they contributed to this debate last time round, some of the promises that they made. Front page of the Daily Express this morning has the word freedoms on it. PM is hell-bent on selling out our Brexit freedoms, quoting Priti Patel without actually asking her to identify what those freedoms are. Freedom to be poorer, freedom to have more red tape, freedom to have more regulations and restrictions imposed upon British exporters, freedom not to move. Is that a thing? We're having a freedom removed. What about the freedom of movement that was abolished? So we're having our freedom not to be free? We're losing our freedom not to be free. They're taking away our absence of freedom. Well, they're not, actually. It looks as if a youth mobility scheme may kick in, which will allow young people to do what they have, of course, done for many, many times, many years, or did do for many, many years, which is to move relatively fluidly between allies and countries. So, how do we do this now? Already you're going to have people turning up in Thurrock with a microphone, sticking it in front of somebody who still believes in unicorns, who has still clung to the idea because people keep telling him, oh, there is a brilliant Brexit. Remember all those people who loved Boris Johnson? Do you remember? All the Boris Johnson fetishists, all the people who thought Boris Johnson was the best thing since sliced bread, all the journalists who left their integrity at the door and invited him into their studios for a massive exercise in protracted toe tickling. Do you remember Boris Johnson? You remember Boris Johnson, right? All we could talk about at one point was Boris Johnson. Theresa May couldn't get a deal because she was, insert whatever pejorative you prefer, a woman, a bit wet. She wasn't a proper leaver. She was a Remainer in wolf's clothes. So poor old Theresa May couldn't get a deal for love nor money. But along came Boris Johnson, who promised the earth to everybody, promised to have his cake and to eat it, swore blind that there wouldn't be any trouble aligning Northern Ireland with both the United Kingdom and the European Union, even as the United Kingdom left the European Union. Absolute bonker. And what did he sign? He signed a dog's dinner. He signed a deal that made everything worse. And not to defend Boris Johnson, but there wasn't a great deal else on offer. Because once you'd promised the impossible, whatever you were left with, however improbable or undesirable, had to be the only thing left on the table. And you come now to this morning of mild rapprochement. You come now to a deal that will undo some of the damage. Most obviously, it will make it easier for British businesses to export to the European Union. That is very good for business. And it is also, it seems, likely to give us access to a £150 billion military fund. And I listen, it's not my area of expertise, Brexit is, but not that specific bit. We're pretty well placed on that, I'd have thought, with BAE and other arms manufacturers. You might not like it, but Putin's invasion of Ukraine has sort of changed the arithmetic on European military matters. And if we were not able to put in for those contracts, we'd have been on a hiding to nothing because we want to be part of the resistance, but we'd also quite like a piece of the action for arming the resistance to Russian imperial ambition. So that's a good thing as well. There's stuff that's good for business, stuff that's good for Britain, good for our young people. Fishing industry. I mean, how many people following the news think that the fishing industry has been let down or has somehow been betrayed? The situation that fishermen will find themselves in for the next few years is exactly the same as the one that they've been in for the last few years. Absolutely nothing there has changed, except for the fact that because of the agri-food deal and the fact that the egress of goods, of edibles, including fish, from the United Kingdom to Europe, that will actually get easier. So they're going to have exactly the same fishing arrangements that they had in place previously. They're just going to have their ability to sell fish into the European Union made easier. I mean, I'm still awaiting the fine detail, but it will be easier. How much easier? We will see. And so why does it feel so weird today? As the inevitable undoing of some of the damage begins, and as the usual suspects who didn't understand it then and don't understand it now return to their ludicrous sloganeering and their talk of betrayal and freedom without ever being required to pin down precisely what they mean, suddenly they rediscover their fetishistic interest in the fishing industry. Remember, we talked on Thursday about why they all went absolutely silent on the question of fishing the minute that they got the win that they wanted. You know why. It's because the minute you're actually trying to explain things in detail or trying to explain things with reference to evidence, everything falls apart. The fishing industry, for good or for ill, employs about the same number of people as the tattooing industry in this country. Its contribution to GDP is relatively negligible. But more important than any of that, they are in a better situation tomorrow than they were in yesterday, or they're in a better situation the day after the deal is signed than they would be on the day before. And then you've got this strange scenario where I now find myself, and I do allow myself moments of self-indulgence on this issue, because if I stay on the radio for 50 years, there's never going to be another issue where some of us have been proved so spectacularly right, despite being a tiny, tiny proportion of media voices. All of those explaining why Brexit would be ridiculous and why you were trusting people who, frankly, couldn't run a bath, why that would turn out to be a disaster. There's never going to be another moment like that in our time together. And we're still there, still being proved right on a daily basis. So why does it feel so weird? Well, partly because the ecosystem we inhabit is still defined by... I even struggle sometimes with what words to use, because I don't think these people are idiots. The people that edit newspapers, like the Daily Mail or the Sun or the Express, I think the Times is edited by a Brexiter now. It wasn't at the time of the actual referendum. They're not idiots, these people. Getting a newspaper out is hard. They're not idiots. So what is the correct word to use? I don't like words like traitor in those kind of contexts. We'll leave that sort of language to the far right. But what is the word you'd use to describe people who insist on telling the UK public to punch themselves in the face, fiscally, economically, in terms of mobility? What's the word you'd use? We used to cling. We clung very hard, or I did at least, clung very, very hard to the idea of contempt for the con men and compassion for the conned. Okay? Contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. And that was pretty simple, actually, and I felt at the time very important. Because if you had even a cursory appreciation of how the UK media works, you would know that the voices lining up to tell people that we had to leave because ... and you never examine the dots. The voices lining up to tell people that we had to leave, that we'd be better off if we did, that immigration would somehow miraculously come down, but economic growth would go up. People making promise after promise after promise. The disproportionate ratio of those people to the people telling the truth was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it should not have come as a surprise to me, given what I do for a living and what I have done for a living for some time, but it came as an incredible surprise to me, because the more I worked to understand what was going on, the more I realised how wrong I was to think that everybody in journalism had the same central approach. How naive does that sound now? What's your job? My job is to tell people the truth. My job is to give people evidence-based analysis of situations so that they can make a decision in possession of the most information available. No. Your job is to whip up hatred against immigrants for clicks and giggles, for a short-term gain, commercial enhancement, selling a little bit of hatred, and then if as a consequence of that we vote to leave the European Union, then so what? It won't affect me anyway because I'm rich. That's the attitude that an awful lot of people in my line of work seem to have taken. You remember the faces of Johnson and Gove on the morning after it happened? Looked like two little boys with their fingers caught in the cookie jar. They couldn't believe it, but immediately in that moment, the tone was set for the future. Immediately in that moment, they had to pretend, A, that they wanted it badly. Maybe Gove did, Johnson didn't. B, that it was all going to be brilliant. And C, they could never, ever, 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 ever admit that they'd made a mistake. Ever. And I've written a book about this. I don't know whether I've ever mentioned that to you. I've written a book about this. actually, about how the ecosystem in which such craziness could occur has been created, how carefully that ecosystem has been curated to encourage people to smash themselves over the head with a frying pan when they walk into a voting booth. And that's why contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned was such a powerful phrase. The simple idea that if that much effort is being put into conning you to do something, then I am not going to hold it against you when you do it. Even the BBC was broken by this process. People in senior positions, one of them went off to work for Theresa May, actually running the politics output, much of the politics output of the station, while everyone's claiming it's biased to the left or it's pro-Remain. Utterly laughable, worthy of Joseph Goebbels himself, to have the population screaming about how biased the BBC is against them, when in fact it was moving fairly rapidly to being fully in favour of them. The times when you couldn't invite an economist into the studio without having to pretend that it was a 50-50 split among economists, that half of them thought it was going to go great and half of them thought it was going to go badly. It was a split of 99-1. If that, 99.9% of economists explaining that it was going to be bad for Britain, and then a tiny, tiny little proportion of them claiming, and the most famous one of all, Patrick Minford, explaining that it's going to decimate British industry and British agriculture, but we'll be better off. So people never even joined those dots together. The only economist anyone could find to book for a programme was an economist who predicted the decimation of agriculture and fishing. That was the price you would pay for a good Brexit. That was it. Oh man, it's all coming back. This must be what Tom Jones feels like when he starts singing Delilah. I had no idea where all this stuff was filed away in the back of my mind. But what good is it to us? You've now got problems on both sides. You've got the unicornists who believe there is a brilliant Brexit, it just goes to a different school, and they still dominate public discourse. They still edit most newspapers. They still get treated as if they know what they're talking about, despite having been proved completely wrong about everything they said last time round. And then on the other side, you've got people who think that Starmer could have gone further, that we should be rejoining, that we should be getting back into the customs union. And they're almost as wrong as each other. Puts me in a very lonely furrow. But they're almost as wrong as each other for one very, very simple reason. Is that the EU don't want to go much further than they've gone today yet. You've got Nigel Farage ahead in some opinion polls, most opinion polls. How on earth are they going to sign up to something complicated and important when you've got an arsonist sitting around the corner with his Zippo lighter? It is just nonsensical to suggest that they could go further. The betrayal narrative that is greeting Keir Starmer, it's more than nibbling at the edges, but it is by no means a reversal or a return. The betrayal narrative is so loud today. People like Priti Patel, Suella Braverman and the rest of them screaming from the rooftops about betrayal. Imagine what the context, what the environment would be like if he had actually made really, really deep incursions into undoing the damage that Brexit has done. So there we go. There we go. Keir Starmer has negotiated something pretty special, about as good as he could have expected. It will be misrepresented in many, many quarters, but among those of us who actually understand most of the issues involved, you are seeing a massive improvement to British exporters, and you are seeing crucially important access to huge sums of European arms military spending. You have seen a retention of the status quo for our fishing fleet, which largely because we catch mostly mackerel and don't eat it, has been in a fairly anomalous position for generations. Not that anybody bothers to explain that to you. And no doubt if we sent someone to Thurrock with a microphone now, they'd be explaining how they still don't feel that Brexit has been properly delivered, because it was the poorest parts of this country who were most successfully persuaded to vote to make themselves poorer. And the people that set fire to our house are still there with their metaphorical Molotov cocktails, promising that if you just set one more blaze, then everything will just be dandy. It's 10:18. I should really ask you a question, shouldn't I suppose. I can't think of one at the moment. I mean, it's such a strange situation to be in. There's the intellectual appreciation of the inevitability of what is happening and the certain knowledge that the emotional response to it is likely to be as daft and as toxic as it was last time. It's as if, having burned down a house, the man charged with rebuilding it is now being accused of somehow betraying the owners because he's using bricks and not magic beans to build the thing with. I haven't felt particular admiration for Keir Starmer for a while now, particularly last week. But goodness me, you wouldn't wish this on anybody. Having to fix the mess that somebody else made while the people who made the mess are spitting venom at you is absolutely extraordinary. And they're doing it with such abandon. Even I'm surprised by the brass neck of your Farages and your Patels, your Bravermans and the rest of them. And of course, the client journalists who still haven't made the blindest bit of effort to understand the actual facts of the matter. You've burnt something down. This man's trying to rebuild it, and all you've got is brickbats and abuse from the sidelines. And ludicrous claims that by trying to rebuild the thing that you burnt down, you're somehow betraying the people that you rendered homeless. I like this metaphor, and I'm running with it because that's Farage, isn't it? That's where he comes into it. One of the key arsonists now claiming that he's the man to rebuild the house that he burnt down. 19 minutes after 10 is the time. I'm going to tell you the phone number. I'm going to invite you to ring in. I know I haven't really asked you a question as such, but what are you? I've told you how I feel. Normally I mock people for prioritising feelings over facts when it comes to most issues. But this is such a matter of feeling. How do you feel? Let me read you something out, which obviously exists. So Norman is still out there. James, you are deluded. The EU is a protectionist organisation, never going to let Brexit be successful, aided by civil servants and the majority of Parliament. Norman, I'm afraid, is living proof of why contempt for the conman and compassion for the conned is incredibly difficult to sustain, because Norman is about as bright as a mushroom. He has the brains of garden furniture. And yet he's still there in 2025, not just convinced enough of his own rectitude, but convinced enough to contact a national radio station on a programme presented by somebody who has been proved right and right and right again about every single aspect of Brexit. But old Norman, he's still got all the deal and the details that he needs. He found it on his Uncle Keith's Facebook page. He knows that the EU is a protectionist organisation, even though he doesn't know what protectionist means and he can't spell servants. But you trust Norman on this one, because that's what Brexit Britain is. We stand resolute against made-up threats and problems. So maybe that's why I feel so frustrated today. How do you feel? 0345 6060 973. And if you don't ring me and tell me how you feel, I'm going to carry on talking until 1 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Okay, I think it is actually time to ask that question. Has my catchphrase reached its sell-by date? I'm not just Norman. Here's another one. You know, hundreds of thousands of hard-working Brits had their livelihood removed by replacing them with European workers at a fraction of the cost to employers, boosting their profits. They are back in well-paid jobs now. This didn't happen in France or Germany. There is a level of stupid so complete that light bends around it. How do you even begin to communicate with people who think that we are better off now, or that people's working conditions, immigration has tripled, mate. So what do you think those people are doing? If not doing jobs that you somehow feel involve the undercutting of British workers, a claim for which there is precisely zero evidence. Is it time to abandon the catchphrase? Is it now contempt for the conmen? And if you're still conned, it's contempt for you as well. If you're still clinging to the notion that Farage is a man you can trust, that Boris Johnson is an honest broker, that Priti Patel is capable of lacing her own shoes unaided, then I'm afraid you've had your fun. You've had your chance. 9 years of lies and nonsense. And if you haven't seen through it yet, then you are as much a part of the problem as the people who sold it to you in the first place. So that, at 24 minutes after 10, is your question this morning. Is it time to abandon compassion for the conned? Because as the attempts to reignite the fires of Brexit ignorance and idiocy goes into full swing, those of us who are sick to the eye teeth of having our country diminished, our status reduced, our freedoms abolished, those of us who are sick to the eye teeth of it, are actually now also pretty cross with the people that fell for it, as opposed to the people who sold it. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Ian's on the Isle of Wight in Cowes. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh my God, James.
Are you all right?
No, I'm not all right, mate. Like I say, long-time listener, second-time caller. I'm getting over that thing way back 10 years or so ago. So all that by the past, what you got to understand, mate, is this is why I love you.
Let's stay with we. Let's run with we, not I. I preferred it that way round. No, but go on. Talk to me about you.
Well, I don't know how everybody else is feeling. I just know how you make me feel. Because sometimes it feels like I'm going insane.
Yes.
But I drive deliveries for a living. So I'm on LBC, and the other one that's related to the Clock news station all day long. And the things that you hear and just the insanity of what's going on and people don't, it just and last week I actually got to the stage where I actually turned off LBC. Not because of you.
No, you are perish the thought.
Yeah, not because of you. You are our you are our soma. You're the only thing that makes me feel like I'm not going totally insane. And today I felt that you'd actually reached the point of anger with what's going on that I have. It's like I can't take it anymore. And I don't know what else to do. There was a stage a few months back when Starmer first got in, and I saw that everywhere you went, they were trying to stitch him up. He could, like I said to the researcher, he could find a pot of gold at the bottom of his garden, and they'd find a way to turn it round and completely stitch him up with it.
You don't even need a metaphor. He bought a field so that his disabled mother could look after abandoned donkeys, and they turned that into a scandal.
I know, and it's what do you do? So at that point, I thought to myself, right, I'm going to fight. I'm going to be one of those warriors. They've taken over the internet, or the X and Twitter and stuff like that. They've taken it over. So you need people to actually get together and start fighting and start going.
Just tell the truth. Just keep telling the truth and keep asking questions. So the question for today, lest anybody need any notes, is to ask people to describe exactly what freedoms they think that Keir Starmer has given up, and exactly what the benefit they most enjoy as a consequence of Brexit is, the benefit that they're currently enjoying. I was surprised that I got angry. I was flat at 10 o'clock. I was spitting nails by 20 past, but that's the nature of both my job and my personality.
I don't know how you do it, mate.
Oh, come on. I'm very well looked after.
You must be, because I need therapy.
Yes.
At the moment, it's
don't forget people like Steve. Steve's been in touch. I love hearing O'Brien having a breakdown this morning. The best thing ever. Also, his blind-minded followers. So remember, our crime of understanding things, and therefore being frustrated and annoyed by things because we understand them. People like Steve, who doesn't understand anything, he loves that. He loves your frustration and your anger, because for reasons that he is too thick to explain, it makes him feel better about his own desiccated little existence. And that's why I don't know what's going to happen next. Starmer is going to get it from all angles. From all of the people who told you to buy this nonsense, all of the people who gave you that box with a big shiny toaster on the side and told you that was yours, now you can take it home, that's yours to keep, whatever happens, big shiny toaster on the box. You got the box home, you opened it and you found a breeze block. And because I think it's appalling that you were sold a breeze block when you believed it was a toaster, you were sold it, Steve. You were sold a breeze block and you still think it's a toaster. And I think that's appalling. So yes, perhaps it is time, and I haven't asked Ian this, is it time to abandon the compassion for the conned element of our Brexit mantra, Ian?
That's why I love you, because that's exactly what I was going to say. That should be the question. And then, while I was on the phone, apparently, obviously you came out with it. That became
the bloody hell, everyone's a producer now. You beat me to it. And I don't know, because I might finish the show today, I might get to 11:30, I might get to 11:15 and find myself thinking, this isn't fair. These people, old Steve celebrating the fact that people who understand things are cross on behalf of people who don't. Maybe I'll come back from the news thinking, no, it's not right. We need to be kind. We need to be compassionate. We need to extend the hand of friendship and the warm hug of understanding and empathy to people who've been sold lie after lie after lie by liar after liar after liar, all of whom will be queuing up today to attack Keir Starmer, moan the loss of non-existent freedoms, and fail utterly to tell you exactly what it is that constitutes a benefit of the thing that they flogged you nearly a decade ago. Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:33. If you're relatively new to this programme, you may not be familiar with the mantra, the slogan that we largely subscribe to in the aftermath of the Brexit referendum: contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. Something I felt very passionate about. In fact, one of the strangest moments of my career was giving a speech outside Parliament when it looked like there might be a chance of a second referendum, and I saw various placards broadcasting my own catchphrase back to me from the crowd. That was slightly surreal. And I've clung to it. I've wobbled on occasion. I may have asked you in the past whether it was time to abandon the con, but how can anybody still believe it was a good idea? How can anybody still believe the lies they were told by people like Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and Nigel Farage? How can anybody still believe that Brexit would be good for Britain? Friends like Norman notwithstanding, Donald Trump fans who think the EU is a protectionist organisation. It protects its members. Why would you want to be in any organisation that didn't? And why wouldn't you want to be in an organisation that did? These words like protectionist and sovereignty are almost always a guarantee that the person using them has no real inkling of what they mean. They become like the verbal equivalent of hit first, ask questions later. What do you want? Sovereignty. What does it mean? I don't know and I don't care because someone has told me they're going to take it away and they will have to prize it out of my cold, dead hand. Yes, but what is this thing that you value so much? What are these laws that you don't want to have to obey? What are these freedoms that you think you've secured? What are these benefits that Brexit has brought you, even as the hit to GDP is measured in the tens of billions of pounds? And of course, GDP goes down, Treasury income goes down. Treasury income goes down. Governments have less money to spend on things like the NHS. So I genuinely, even as someone who's followed every twist and turn of this ridiculous saga, I genuinely don't understand. Everyone else celebrates when the polls come out. Say only 30% of people still support it or whatever the figures are. I don't. I look at that and think, what the hell is wrong with that 30%? How much more proof do you need? How much more evidence do you need that you were conned? I don't blame you for being conned. The effort put into it was superhuman, spectacular. You've got Rupert Murdoch, you've got the Barclay brothers, you've got Viscount Rothermere, Paul Dacre, all the biggest hitters in the UK media, all trying to sell you a lie, all trying to sell you a con. So it's a blooming miracle that Remain got 48%. Never mind that it didn't win. It's a miracle it did so well. So I never blamed you. But you're sitting there now and you're still... What are you doing? Crossing your fingers? Putting a tooth under your pillow every night in the belief that a good Brexit will suddenly be there in the morning? It baffles me. And it does make me increasingly wonder whether it's time to abandon compassion for the conned. Maybe go for frustration or maybe go for contempt. Because if you're still inflicting this on the rest of us now, then you actually become part of the problem. Aid's in Lancaster. Aid, what would you like to say?
Hey, I feel like I've been on a roller coaster the last few days.
Yes.
Like, I immigrated from Nigeria. I'm now a British citizen. You go through Brexit, you think we've gone through a dark phase.
Yes.
And then Starmer comes in, you had last week's speeches, and you're thinking, yes, Christ alive. And then
this is ugly stuff. This is ugly stuff last week, of course.
It really is. And whether the words were used wrongly or it's just the potential, it's that environment, right? And then you get the deal and you're thinking, Christ alive, like there is hope.
Maybe don't say that again, because it is mildly blasphemous. So just don't make me turn me into Mary Whitehouse, but don't say it again. You've said it twice now. Say Five Alive. That's a rather nice fruit drink, popular in my youth. So you've woken up feeling a bit more hopeful today.
Yeah. But I said to the producer or the lady who let me on, right? Like that, it's kind of like Dunkirk. I think that's probably Britain's biggest asset.
Yes,
is snatching victory from the hands of self-harm.
Well, and yet, I mean, I read an article today. A journalist had gone to Thurrock to ask people how they felt, and they felt that Brexit hadn't really happened, or the things that they were expecting. I don't know what they were expecting to turn up. I never did know what they were expecting to turn up. A mythical image of 1955, I think, is what they thought they were going to get. And of course, the massive majority of the country in 1955 were considerably worse off than they were in 2015. But you are so a win, that's a form of win that will be portrayed by almost all of the UK media as a loss. That's who we are now.
But James, think about what you said earlier, right? Like, this isn't about those people, because if anything, Brexit and all that has proved that it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant that they don't understand. Like, it's not about understanding, right?
No, it's about feeling. So
exactly.
Yeah. And people who feel. Go on.
Exactly. So now that we've got a deal, perhaps that's a triumph, that there is hope in the era of post-facts.
Gosh, nicely put. Interesting results across Europe overnight as well, which, again, I've got that opinion politis, is that, you get a relatively centrist or liberal seeing off a far-right candidate in somewhere like Romania, and everyone goes, yay, the fight back has begun. I don't. On a bad day, I look at that and think, how the hell does the far-right get so much support? Even when they lose, I still worry about that stuff. But as Adi points out, the triumph of facts is actually inevitable in the long term. In the great sweep of human history, the facts will always win. At some point in the dim and distant past, even people currently living under the jackboot of North Korean administrations or Vladimir Putin's Russia, the truth will eventually out. It has to. Facts have to prevail. And then, of course, the process of chipping away at them and the rise of totalitarian regimes, people with dictatorial ambitions begin to chip away at facts and truth, as Americans are discovering at the moment. But they do have to come out on top, which is why I wonder how we should approach people who are still in denial of the facts, who still think there was a brilliant Brexit, but it goes to a different school, or it could have all been so wonderful, we've been betrayed, or unicorns do exist, that we just haven't found one yet. What's the correct approach there? Does it even matter? Because if you're dealing with members of a cult, there's not a great deal you can do to break the spell of the cult. Richard is in Kenton in Middlesex. Richard, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
First time I've spoken to you. I've seen you quite a bit on YouTube.
Welcome.
And fascinated with your comments. I was in favour of Brexit. I voted for Brexit, but it hasn't worked. The previous government, it didn't work, and this government, it hadn't worked because the politicians are, in a word, hopeless, all of them.
What would you have done?
That's why the Reform Party is going to get a lot of votes in all the future elections.
What would you have done?
What would I have done?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a politician. That's not my expertise.
No, but if you don't have a view on that...
I would certainly have sealed the borders up.
Sealed the borders up?
Yes.
Okay.
I think zero immigrants. We've got how many people in this country? 75, 80 million unofficially. Well over 70 million.
Unofficially?
When I was growing up, there was 50 million.
Right.
How can this small area, this tiny country, accommodate 20 million more people?
Yeah.
It's crazy. It cannot work. And also from overpopulation, you can't get a doctor's appointment. You can't park your car.
Well, that's largely
that's
large. Well, I'm in London. I came in on a bus this morning. You're in Kenton.
I go on buses. I'm a senior citizen.
You're in Kenton. So your theory is we just need to do all of the same things again, but harder.
The same things meaning what?
Trusting Nigel Farage, most obviously.
Well, give him a try.
Yeah, because the last promises he made have gone so well, haven't they?
I wouldn't know what they were exactly.
He told you Brexit was going to do loads of magical things, and it's done precisely none of them.
But
and some of us explained why it would be impossible to deliver all of the things that he promised, and we've been proved right. But you still trust him?
I don't trust him.
Yes, you do.
I'll give them a chance because
that involves
the other two
trust.
major parties have got any chance of winning an election.
And apart from somehow
90% of the country would say they're hopeless.
And apart from somehow sealing our borders, when I ask you what you could or what any politician could have done differently, you've got nothing.
I haven't got nothing. I'm not an expert on how I would seal the borders.
No, but let's forget about sealing the borders and talk about how Brexit could have gone better.
Sealing the borders is not the right words.
Well, I think they were yours.
They were my words.
Okay.
They weren't the right words.
That's okay. That's a very Brexity
wrong.
thing to do. What other things could have made Brexit better?
By keeping the population down.
How would we do that? Sterilisation?
No.
Contraception?
The immigration.
Right. Apart from
The
immigration,
birth rate is falling. British people are having fewer children.
therefore we need immigration.
So
but
we
we're
need
abolishing
more
immigration. So apart from immigration, how could Brexit have gone better?
apart from immigration.
Yeah.
By having control of your own country, which I wouldn't know whether we have or not, and not being ruled by Europe.
In what way? Give me an example of that, would you?
I can't give you an example.
Does that not embarrass you on any level? You're on the national radio now, convinced that you've got some interesting points to make. And when the presenter asks you politely, calmly, for just like one single intelligent insight into the position that you hold, you just say, oh, I can't. I've got nothing. I'm not a politician. I am
slightly embarrassed because I'm not an expert. I'm
Do you know who else isn't an expert on this?
You.
No, I am. Ask me anything. Every single person who's encouraged you to support Brexit, there's not a single expert among them. And yet you're still trusting them instead of the people who are being proved right about everything. And I hear the chuckle, and that means that you're not someone who's been desperately affected by Brexit. You're not someone whose business has been shut down. You're someone who lies awake in bed in Middlesex having weird dreams about immigrants. You're not someone who's had...
You're very rude to me, aren't you?
Well, I am very rude to you, yes, because of what you've done to my country.
What I've done.
And now you're here to tell me you've got no clue about anything.
What have I done? I voted for Brexit. It was 51% against 49%.
You voted for Brexit and you still cling to the carcass that it could somehow have gone well. And apart from making life difficult for people who don't look like you haven't got a single clue what that means, what you want, or how you'd go about getting it. So how on earth, Richard, could I not be rude to you?
Well, a lot of people are rude to me because I've got very strong views on certain things.
No, it's not because you've got very strong views, Richard. It's because you can't explain a single one of them.
Because I told you 3 times I'm not an expert on politics.
So you're literally sitting in front of me now saying I've got very strong views on things, but I don't understand any of them.
Which 90% of the population would have. All the people who
I can
vote.
promise you, Richard, that 90% of the population do not have very strong views about things that they can't explain. And if they did, they wouldn't be stupid enough to ring up a radio station and advertise it.
I just wanted to speak to you. I wanted to see how many times you'd interrupt me. But I have got strong views.
But you don't understand why?
Yes, I do.
Because you're not an expert. In fact, you are Mr. Brexit. I've got really strong views. I hate immigration, and I have absolutely no insights whatsoever into all of the reasons behind the strong views that I hold.
I don't hate immigration. If we had a population of 50 million, I would encourage immigration. But you have to. America is how many times as big as Britain? 30, 40 times as big in area. They've got 6 times as many people. They've got 300 and something million.
It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:49 is the time. I have got very strong opinions, but I don't understand anything. Is it fair to describe that as the very essence of Brexit? With a little side order of sealing our borders and absolute ignorance of the economic catastrophe that would entail. I've got very strong opinions, but I don't understand anything because I'm not an expert. So who do you trust? Oh, I trust the experts like Nigel Farage and Suella Braverman, Richard What's-His-Chops and Priti Patel, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, absolute experts. And you know when you speak to someone like Richard that 3 years ago he was waving his little Boris Johnson flag up and down the streets of Middlesex. And here we are. So I don't know how anybody can still maintain compassion for the conned. Not when that is the voice of the conned. I've got very strong opinions and I don't understand anything. I can't tell you what freedoms I've lost in Starmer's deal. I can't tell you what has been betrayed. I can't tell you what rules I had to obey. He even pulled that one out of the bag. You have to live by EU rules. Do you know what? You have to live by Marks and Spencer's rules if you move into Marks and Spencer's for an hour or two. Bye-bye compassion for the conned. What are we going to replace it with? I do not know. Chris is in Liverpool. Chris, what would you like to say?
James, first time call, long time listener. First, can I just say thank you for everything you do because you're a national treasure, mate. Honestly, I really do mean that.
Thank you.
if I can just say as well, please don't stop showing compassion for the con, because as hard as it was, I was one of those people up until maybe 6 years ago.
Yeah, but that's different. What about the last fella? Am I supposed to feel compassion for him? Mister, people are very rude to me because I've got very strong opinions and I don't understand anything. Up with something, seal borders, something. How am I supposed to feel compassion for him?
Because I think he is, bless him, I think he doesn't realise how stacked against him this media landscape in this country is. And to be honest with you, I've only been switched onto that in a very small way since kind of listening to yourself. I consider myself relatively educated. I went to university. I've got a good job. I'm probably one of those people that you'd say I'm not impacted by Brexit, and thank God for that. But I never realised at the time when that referendum was going on just how you alluded to it before, and I remember you said it a few years ago, I think, about how when economists went into the BBC saying it was, it was presented as 50%.
Mateless calls it Emily calls it the Minford paradigm, because there was one economist who'd come on and make the case for leaving, and very rarely would people remind their viewers, their listeners, that he's the same bloke who said that Brexit would decimate all of agriculture and all of fishing, and he had to sit there as if he spoke for 50% of the economic establishment, whereas in fact he spoke for less than 1%.
Well, this is it, is it? And I said to your researcher before that, I described it to her as a trap, and I kind of said that without really thinking, and I realised that actually sums it up perfectly for me, because I've always thought, even to now, that I try and pay attention, and I really try and really kind of study things, and I thought, how did I get so badly conned? And I thought, that's it. I thought I was going into it with my eyes open, but I bloody wasn't, and I guess this is where almost you have to keep, fighting that good fight to sort of say to these people, almost help pull the wool over their eyes, I guess, for want of a better word. I don't know, but when he said it before about should I stop showing compassion for the con, I thought, please God, don't do that, because that's almost the death of us. I think if we sort of. Well,
it's difficult though. It's a numbers game, isn't it? Because compassion for people who admit that they made a mistake, even if they can't yet do it publicly, who they acknowledge privately the damage that they've done, and then how many people are left in the bucket that basically involves not understanding anything at all, but being convinced that immigration is the source of all evil. I mean, at some point, don't we have to stop being compassionate to them, or do we carry on trying to explain the relationship between population size and economic growth, and that leaving the Dublin Agreement, as good old Richard probably has never heard of, meant that we could no longer send people to other European Union countries? It literally made doing the things that they claim they want actively harder, again, as some people explained at the time. Is there no limit to your compassion, Chris?
You know what? You're presenting a very good argument that I might be tested at some point as well. But no, I genuinely, I'm minded to. I can't remember who said it now. Was it Ronald Reagan back in the day who said something like, if you're explaining you're losing? Was that something like that? I've not made
probably. No, it rings a bell. It's the same is true of jokes, isn't it? If you have to explain it hasn't worked. And no one speaks for you, actually. No, or me. I notice. I think Keir Starmer making the best of a bad lot, undoing some of the damage inflicted upon this country by the arsonists, even as the arsonists sit there stuffing rags into their milk bottles full of flammable liquid and claiming that somehow he is betraying something unspecified. He is betraying this unicorn Brexit. He's not angry. He's not speaking for the people who have been robbed blind by men like Richard, robbed blind by Boris Johnson, robbed of dignity, robbed of pride, robbed of economic health, robbed of modernity, robbed of mobility, robbed of opportunity, robbed blind, even as they swan off to the House of Lords or go to Nice with their trotters up, to paraphrase the great Danny Dyer. Chris, thank you. Stay safe. James is in Oxford. James, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello.
Yeah, please don't give up. I'm much the same as the last caller, but Richard sort of infuriated me a wee bit. I think
millions of Richards out there, mate. Millions of them still.
Well, we know what Richard stands for as well.
Oh, don't be like that. Don't be like that. He has to deal with enough rudeness as it is in life without adding that to the list of things. But
it's just that people like Richard, it's the age-old, if they can't realise that doing the same thing and getting a different result and isn't madness. And I just don't know how you're going to appease those people. Especially my favourite line from him, which is he wants to grow the population admitting that birth rates are low.
Yes.
Doesn't want immigration to seal the border.
He wants it down to 50 million. But I mean, I don't know if there's millions of people like that out there. It's just when you push people on the immigration obsession, they often end up in strange places. Have you seen what Daniel Hannan did over the weekend?
No.
I had to actually get Eleanor to check this was real. I thought someone had put together like a fake post. I've lost it now, so I'll have to dig it out later. But he talked about the UK being in a GIMP mask. He talked, Daniel Hannan, Lord Hannan to you, actually, James, started writing about ball gags on social media. These people are absolutely unhinged, and yet they're still in the driving seat.
Can I just as well highlight how we're trying to appease the Richards? Because the first thing I heard about the deal this morning with Starmer, which I was quite relieved about.
Yes, of course you were.
The best feature out of it is that we're going to be able to go through EU gates. And I thought, surely, of that whole deal, is that all people have chosen to appease people going to Benidorm?
Yes.
They can go through the EU gates. It's sad, really.
Well, I mean, it's a win of sorts, but yeah, you're right. It is as if the media abandoned 10 years ago any attempt at explaining to the British public what was real and what was not. And they are still suffering from that hangover today. There'll be people tearing their hair out at the BBC over how on earth we can cover this topic. You've still got a bloke on the board who was knighted by Theresa May essentially for services to Brexit. But remember, the BBC is very, very biased against it. How do you know that? Because Nigel keeps telling you it is. What do we do instead of compassion then? Compassion for the contrite. Contempt for the con men, compassion for the contrite. What do we do with the people who were conned and still can't see it or still won't see it? Jules is in Swindon. Jules, what would you like to say?
My suggestion for the people you just described who still believe is, instead of compassion, it's just plain pity. Because that's got the element of contempt in there with it. You still feel sorry for them, but because you think you're wrong. It's like, we're right and you're wrong.
But I can prove that I'm not wrong, because if I could just reduce the population to 50 million, then everything would be brilliant again.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And you can't prove me wrong on that.
Again, I think the only way that you can argue against that is exactly what you did. Okay, how?
Yes.
What are you going to do?
Oh, I'm not an expert. It's not my job to know how to do it. I'm not a unicorn farmer, but I believe in unicorns. I just haven't seen one yet.
Yeah, exactly. And I pity you for believing that, Richard. Sorry.
What does he get?
He's going to hate me for saying that.
What does he get? What does he cling to? What, that certainty and that... I mean, in a way, the honesty was extraordinary. Because who would want to publicly state, I've got very strong opinions, but I don't understand anything?
Well, I read it. He doesn't even he doesn't understand his own opinions. He doesn't know why he thinks that. He knows
that's so commonplace.
But he doesn't know why.
That's so commonplace, I think. It must be, mustn't it? Otherwise, the numbers would have hit zero long ago. As I say, I'm that weird feeling. Everyone else starts celebrating when the opinion polls come in, and I just go, how can 30%, 20%, 10%, 2% of the population still think this is a good idea? I'm not going to rest until it's 100% of the population acknowledge that Brexit is just silly. Silly. It doesn't have to be stupid. It doesn't have to be disastrous. It's just silly. You remember the passports? No one's mentioned passports. That was a really significant moment. How mad does that feel now? What are you going to do? I'm going to vote to leave the biggest single market in the world. Why? Because I want a blue passport, please. Do you remember that? You remember people who genuinely felt that the hue on the cover of their passport was more important than generational economic health, freedom of movement for their children and grandchildren? What is it that you're getting? And you know why they ended up with a blue passport? Because everything else got chiseled away by honest brokers. So they'd say laws, and you'd say which laws. They'd say freedoms, and you'd say which freedoms. And all they had left was a passport cover.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:03, and it is real. I can't quite believe that it's real. Someone that Boris Johnson put in their House of Lords posted on social media this weekend, Starmer is turning Britain into the EU's GIMP, handing us over to Eurocrat control encased in shiny black leather and with a ball gag. These people are not normal, are they? That's Daniel Hannan, the world's wrongest man. And don't forget, we'll be celebrating Daniel Hannan Day next month. But whose brain comes up with this stuff? Who sits there contemplating the catastrophe that they've inflicted on this country and says, I know what I'll do. I'll describe my own country as a gimp in a shiny black leather suit with a bald gap. I mean, whose mind even goes to places like that when they're not thinking about politics? But to go to places like that when they are thinking about politics is just extraordinary. Kemi Badenoch's got involved. 12 years access to British waters is 3 times longer than the government wanted, demonstrating an ignorance of how negotiations work that is visible from space. So huge is it. You go in asking for something you know you won't get, and then you work back from that. It was the fundamental... Good Lord, this is strange. I'm not sure I like it, but it is a bit like sort of Tom Jones. What comes after Delilah if Tom Jones is doing all his greatest hits? It's Not Unusual, probably. Yeah, so now I've just remembered It's Not Unusual. I've just remembered the lyrics to It's Not Unusual. When he turned up for the negotiation on the no deal thing, do you remember? People would ring me and talk to me about how they know how to negotiate. And what you've got to do is you've got to be prepared to walk away. And I said, we've already voted to leave. We've set fire to our old car. So you drive to the... God, blimey, this is a blast from the past. You drive to the auto dealer, you drive to the car dealership, and you've got your old car as part exchange, and you're using it to negotiate for a new car. And everyone would say to me, you've got to be prepared to drive away. You've got to be prepared to drive away. And I'd say, we've already blown up the car. We've driven to the car dealership. This is one of my favourite metaphors. It's not my all-time favourite. That involves cake. We've driven to the car dealership. We've hopped out of our car, set fire to the vehicle that we arrived in, and then marched into the negotiating room, marched into the car dealership. David Davis, actually, the Swiss Tony of politicians, marching into the car dealership with no car, with no keys. With no paperwork, actually. You'll remember that famous first moment when he arrived to negotiate with nothing but a grin. And started negotiating. And if you don't do what we want, we'll drive away again. And you just go, what in? What are you going to drive away in? And then the same half-wits started queuing up to tell us that we could leave without any deal at all. Let's go, WTO. So people who probably didn't even know what WTO stood for. And if they did, they certainly couldn't begin to explain to you what that would actually look like. Because no country, to the best of my knowledge, there may have been like a weird example shortly after a civil war where somewhere like Mauritania actually had to trade exclusively on WTO terms. But people didn't care, because they didn't feel any compunction to understand anything. I wonder how much of it is down to comment sections and the internet age. Because until comment sections came along, having a strong opinion and no intelligence was something people would be embarrassed by. Having very strong opinions about things that they don't understand was the sort of thing that would make you keep your hand down in school. In the age of comment sections on the internet and chat rooms and the rest, it's as if the queue is round the block and back of people who don't understand anything but have got incredibly pungent opinions. And of course they have their heroes. It's people in my profession who have very strong opinions but don't actually understand anything. They're just better at covering it up than some of the more ordinary voters. There are politicians, the patron saints of people who don't understand anything but have very strong opinions, like Daniel Hannan, or Kemi Badenoch, actually, is quite a good example. Nigel Farage, probably the best example of somebody who understands implicitly. He doesn't need to understand anything. He just needs to point at something and make people feel aggrieved or angry or frightened or, quotes, invaded, end quotes. And then the fact that he doesn't understand anything doesn't matter a dot. The only thing that they could understand when push came to shove was the colour of their passport. They don't know what sovereignty meant. They don't know what freedom meant. They didn't understand what regulatory alignment meant in the context of the island of Ireland. They didn't understand what red tape was or what would happen to red tape in the event of leaving. Eventually, all you had was meaningless words like sovereignty, because you can't interrogate someone's belief in sovereignty. You ask them what it means and they just tell you what they feel. and the colour of a passport. How long is it since you remembered that? It used to pop up every 10 minutes. It used to be a constant refrain. I'm leaving because I want a blue passport. And then there are the infamous examples, the people who thought that we had to leave the European Union to retain 3-pin plugs, or the people who thought that we'd be able to wrap our fish and chips in manky old newspaper again if we left the European Union, or the people who thought something about light bulbs and hoovers that they didn't really understand either. The epic manipulation was absolutely everywhere. And it's back today. You've got the leader of the opposition saying, we're becoming a rule taker from Brussels once again. Ignorance, again, so epic you can see it from space. When we left the European Union, but retained a desire to do any trade with them whatsoever, that was the moment we became a rule taker from Brussels. When we were part of the European Union, we were in the business of making the rules that we and everybody else had to abide by. It's so strange to come back to this after a few years off and recognise the gristle between the ears of almost every prominent Brexiter. And, of course, every unprominent Brexiter as well. So, today is partly an exercise in getting things off our chest, letting out some hot air, and partly an exercise in wondering what we do, what approach should we take? Those of us who find verbal violence, if you like, or ad hominem attacks a little bit tricky. Sometimes they're the only tools that will do the job, but the constant sense of grievance and anger. I don't know what the alternative is for the people who support the truth. Should we have got angrier sooner? Should we be angry now? Keir Starmer's not going to get angry about this anytime soon, but the people that he's trying to keep quiet, the people he is trying to appease, are unappeasable because they are not inhabiting a sane universe. They're writing things about the United Kingdom being a gimp in a shiny black leather suit with a ball gag. These are not rational, sensible, serious people. They are absolute headbangers and half-wits. And they're still dominating the conversation with their blue passports. And we haven't even mentioned bananas. Can you get me the question time clip? Because everyone thought this was exaggerated or made up. You genuinely think about it. The bananas. When you have to somehow make somebody feel aggrieved and none of the facts will let you. I need that person there to feel that the EU is their enemy, right? But I've got nothing to prove it. I can make some relatively meaningless noise about an army without hopefully anybody else pointing out that generally in life the armies you need to worry about are not the armies you are in. But yeah, EU army, and then maybe resurrect some sort of Nazi ghosts and talk about the Fourth Reich or the EU SSR or something like that. But when push really comes to shove, people are going to need something substantive, something they can get their teeth into, something they can feel. Why do I want to leave the European Union? Because they don't let you have bendy bananas. What the hell happened to our country in the first few years of the last decade? How did we become a place where significant swathes of the population, some of whom so persuaded of this position that they would parrot it on Question Time, on live television, that leaving the biggest single market in the history of the world was a good idea because something I don't really understand about how bendy a banana can be. And you know, not that specific story, but you know where most of those stories started? Most of the nonsenses about condoms and Italians, about bananas and crisp packets. You know where it mostly started? Boris Blinking Johnson, the biggest arse-anist of them all, sending his little missives back from Brussels, where he'd been at school because his own father was a member of the European Parliament, and in his own words, enjoying the sound as he lobbed bricks back to Blighty, enjoying the sound that they made as they crashed through the greenhouse roof, lying and lying and lying again to the British public about imaginary, embellished, invented or exaggerated things that the EU did to us, which meant that when push came to shove and you asked them what they could actually point at as evidence of some overreaching tyranny, they had bananas. Bananas and blue passports. which, if memory serves, we would have been entitled to retain anyway if we'd wanted to, the blue passport, which, of course, subsequently turned out to be printed in France. The lies of these people, the ignorance of these people, the absolute shamelessness of these people, the absence of shame is such a dangerous thing. Just look at Donald Trump. No shame. On one level, it's a superpower, because it frees you from the concerns of conscience, compassion, empathy, honesty, evidence, facts. But on another level, it's kryptonite. Because if you have no shame, you will do to others things that they could never, ever do to anyone else. And the level of lying and ignorance still on display today is extraordinary. Extraordinary. How did our country get turned into a place where previously sensible people could be obsessed with non-existent claims about bananas or the colour of their passport cover? And I don't know that Daniel Hannan, yes, he was previously sensible. He's now reduced to writing about Britain becoming the EU's gimp, handing us over to Eurocrat control, encased in shiny black leather with a ball gag. Oh yes, nothing to see here. This is all perfectly normal.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:16. It is like deja vu, writes Julie. If I'd been in a coma for 9 years, I'd wake up, listen to this, and think it was the day after the referendum, not the next decade. The Richards of this country completely baffle me. The same rubbish, the same ignorance, the same beliefs backed up with no evidence, the same lack of awareness of the quantifiable truth. So what will they be fed today by Farage and friends? They'll be fed a betrayal narrative about fishing. So let's address that. If you were a fisherman, you would probably have hoped for better. Let's be absolutely clear. But you're no worse off than you were before this latest deal was signed. And one of the main reasons why it's going to be 12 years is so that we don't have to return to this territory every 3 or 4 years, or indeed every 12 months. And of course, if you're looking to buy a boat, you need to know exactly what is on the horizon for as long ahead as possible. That's going to be as true in Calais as it is in Cornwall. But if the deal contains what we expect it to contain, then if you are catching fish, getting them to the parts of the world that actually eat the fish that are landed in our waters will be made much, much easier, because what Farage and friends did, or without realising or caring and quite possibly understanding, was turn us into a country that would be able to catch fish our own population didn't eat and make it immeasurably harder to ship them to the places that did eat our fish. You might call this the mackerel principle. And of course, the fact that it will be easier to get that fish into those markets is part of a deal that will make it easier for everybody exporting edibles. Well, I should be a little clearer about that. It has a different meaning for the youngsters, doesn't it? Everybody exporting things that you can eat and drink into what has historically been the biggest market we have ever had. So we await the final deal. But if there is an SPS agreement, then getting food and drink into and out of this country will be easier. Because guess what else Brexit did, folks? It increased red tape. Red tape, blue passport. It increased red tape. How many people told you that they were voting to leave the European Union to reduce red tape? And how many people told you that leaving the European Union would do the precise opposite? Oh, they need us more than we need them. God, how many years is it since you heard that? Oh, and here's another one. Everybody ready for the health club, the gym, the sports club, where you'd be able to leave. You could tear up your membership card. In fact, you could set fire to it live on the television, and you could turn up the very next day. You'd still have full access to absolutely everything in the gym. You'd still get all the fluffy towels. You'd still get the sauna, the steam room. You're just not a member anymore. You just walk in because they need you more than you need them. Not paying anymore, but I expect to retain full access to all of the amenities. Thank you very much. Mine's an oat milk latte. And then they woke up 9 years ago and discovered that the polar opposite was true. And some people have still failed to accept that. Some people have still been reduced to posting things on Twitter about gimps and ball gags. That's Lord Hannan. And the elevation of people like Hannan to the House of Actual Lords, the Boris Johnson era, elevating and promoting people as a reward for being wrong or stupid or both, loyal to a lie. Conservative benches in the House of Lords are now full of people elevated for being loyal to a lie and briefly to that liar. How bizarre. How very, very sad. Martin's in Newark. Martin, what would you like to say?
First thing I'd like to say, James, is that I'm pretty excited by today's news. And I'm partly excited because it's making for some great radio today.
Oh, that's very kind.
You're on fire. Ellen is all fired up. Great radio. I'm loving it.
Thank you.
In terms of the questions that you asked at the outset,
yes,
you were making a point about compassion. You're also asking the question about how can people still believe some of this stuff.
Yes.
But, I'm happy to talk about either of those if you'd like to. But you also just talked about comment sections. And that also got me thinking about the whole point of having a debate.
Yeah.
Which is something that you obviously are really familiar with from, your childhood, your time in school, debating champion, all the rest of it. But I think people have lost the thread that the point of a debate is not to convince the person you're debating with, it's to convince the audience.
Yeah.
That's how you win the debate. So you can always have the crazy person making a completely illogical argument. That doesn't matter. They're always going to exist, those people. But the point is, you need to be a better debater to make the case to convince the crowd.
And that leads us to the old line about the ghost train and the speak your weight machine, doesn't it? Because if you're debating someone who's selling tickets to the ghost train and you're selling tickets to the speak your weight machine, you are almost always on a hiding to nothing, because the people telling the exciting lies are going to draw a much bigger crowd than the people telling the sometimes uncomfortable truths.
Well, call me naive, James, but I counter your James O'Brexit classic analogy with another one, which is the one about pendulums.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think what's happened is the pendulum reached that point of majority of people voting for Brexit, tipped maybe even a little bit further beyond that, and people got to really look at what that meant. And now it's swinging back the other way. And I believe that as soon as possible, Keir Starmer has been like Tarzan, leaping onto that pendulum and swinging. As fast
you
as
are more excited. You're certainly more optimistic than I am. I mean, the classic Brexit conundrum, for want of a better word, is that the reporting will not bear much resemblance to the reality. And the reality-denying reporting gives incredible license to politicians to also detach themselves from reality. It's what created Boris Johnson, because he was both. He was one of the journalists responsible for detaching discourse from reality, and he was one of the politicians who benefited most from the detachment of discourse from reality. And what I was not naive enough to hope was that might have changed, that people on the radio, people on the telly, people editing the Express, or people editing the Mail, or people editing the Telegraph, or people editing the Times now, that they might have a little bit of shame, if not to say, sorry, we were wrong, we misled you all, but to say, do you know what? I might sit this one out because we disgraced ourselves and diminished our country so catastrophically last time round. We'll probably leave it this time to the people who know what they're talking about. But they won't, because their livelihoods depend upon it. And that's why your point about debating is both true and incredibly difficult at the same time. How do you win an audience when there are 200 people on the other side with the loudest voices in the country and only 2 on yours?
Well, because people are starting to really hate the loud voices.
I don't know that they are.
The newspapers aren't doing terribly well, as you know.
But Farage is the patron saint of the phenomena that we're describing, and he's riding very high in the opinion polls at the moment, because people think if they just smash their heads against that brick wall harder, then it'll be the wall that hurts next time and not their heads.
But that's why we have to have the debates. That's why we have to have the discussions. That's why we have to literally go and talk to people with whom we disagree. This is fundamentally important to the functioning of democracy. And if you look at the growth of your show.
Well, yeah, you're very kind, but let's just back up to the call from Richard earlier.
Yeah.
Which was great radio, as you say. He hasn't changed. He hasn't changed his mind going away. But your optimism would be that people listening might suddenly have gone, good grief, I'm also someone with very strong opinions who doesn't understand anything. Maybe I should start listening to the people who do, or not?
I think that, I mean, obviously you're like simplifying for
yes,
effect,
of course I am.
and I respect that. But I think that, yeah, it's working.
and that's why, and then someone comes along and gives them a new blue passport, or gives them a new bendy banana, or gives. That's the point, though, isn't it? That's I mean, I know that you're right on one level, but on another level, there's no debater in the world who can kind of deal with the thoughts that were so carefully cultivated over the course of the original debate. People who would not just think these things, but would actually be confident enough to turn up on Question Time and say them out loud in front of the entire country.
I was voting Remain, and at the very last minute I changed my decision and I went to Leave, and the reason because of that is because of I go to a supermarket and a banana is straight. I'm just sick of the silly rules that come out of Europe. And
have the bananas changed?
If you go to Aldi, they're a bit bent.
It was bananas, what did it, was it, for you?
No, it was more than bananas. It's the fact that there's opportunities out there that I feel that we need to see as a country.
And you're optimistic now? You're pleased the way you voted?
I am pleased the way I voted.
All right.
Absolute gibberish. And even there, you see, Dimbleby making it a joke, being respectful, not calling her an imbecile. No one ever did. Maybe that was the right thing to do. Maybe it was the wrong thing to do. But you listen to that now and you think, oh my days. It's like somebody somehow managed to give a kilogram of mincemeat a voice. And it's now speaking live on Question. She sounded perfectly pleasant. And back then, I'd have been cross with the people that had lied to her about bananas. But that infantilizes that woman, doesn't it? It somehow renders her incapable of rational thought. Who could possibly have walked into a supermarket, seen a banana that wasn't as bendy as they might have expected, and decided that that is a reason to inflict tens of billions of pounds worth of damage upon our economy? And then you move from the substantive to the notional, you see. Because if you want someone to point at something you can actually touch, you've got bananas and you've got blue passports. But then you allow them to wax lyrical about things they can't touch, you see, like opportunities or embracing things, or this meaningless rhetoric, this meaningless hollow rhetoric. Drill down into it and they all sound like her, except the ones talking about gimp suits and... I have to be careful how I say that word, because I nearly said entirely the wrong word. It's not a part of humanity that I'm overly familiar with. A ball gag is the thing that Daniel Hannan is currently dreaming of. Thank you, Martin. Anne's in France. Anne, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
yeah,
Anne.
well, I'm absolutely fuming. I'm absolutely fuming. Listen, my source of information is Radio 4 Today in the morning, then I switch over at 11 o'clock French time, 10 o'clock your time to get you.
Très bien.
Okay?
Yes.
Merci beaucoup. But today, something happened on the BBC that was like an epiphany for me.
Go on.
And it was when an interviewer was asking, I think it was the ex-Estonian Prime Minister, she asked her once, so you know, Keir Starmer's happy with this deal. We've the EU has got back fishing rights. We've got this and that. What concessions have the EU made? And the woman, the interviewee, skirted round that. The interviewer came back, what concessions have the EU made? And kept on hammering that home. And I just found that just gobsmacking, actually.
Because it's still the language of enemy.
Exactly. And also, and what's going to stay with people who listen is the fact that we are giving in again. And so even if people are pleased with this negotiation, with this new deal, they're going to be cross because they can't see what the EU are doing.
And no one's going to be told, and they won't realise that a reduction in red tape for a market, for a territory that has very, very high standards when it comes to health and sanitary issues. That is, if you must use these words, that is a concession, but it's also a consequence of negotiation. There's still, God, I hadn't picked up on that. Maybe I'd need to spend a few years outside of the UK, like you have done, to register that. The language of conflict is what you're describing, not the language of compromise and negotiation, the language of conflict. And listen, I don't want to embarrass any other journalists, but there's nobody at the BBC who's going to get a call from upstairs saying, well done, for defusing the language of conflict. I don't think we heard enough from the other side, they say. Well, which side? The side that believes in unicorns? Yes. I don't think we've heard enough from the side that believes in unicorns. And that is why and it was quite a lonely thought when I first framed it, but it's not so lonely now. That's why the BBC betrayed the British public on an incredible scale when it came to the whole Brexit conversation. But if I take you alongside the last caller, he's very upbeat and excited. He thinks the pendulum is swinging back. You don't.
Well, I think, I'm happy. I think that, the EU's role in this is they're dropping barriers that were raised by
us.
We know who.
Yes.
But the fact that that somebody with the social responsibility of the BBC can skew the the like that, I just find terrifying.
And they won't even know that they've done it.
Journalism.
They won't even know that they've done it, because that is what, if you'd allow me a moment of if not congratulation, self-regard, that is why in my last book I wrote, and I included the BBC, quite a lot on the BBC, and then I wrote about the creation of an ecosystem, not only in which people have been successfully persuaded to do very silly things, but also in which the very nature of reality has been skewed and distorted to an extent when people will do the things that you describe. The culmination, I'm going to go to the news headlines now, but I tell you what I could do. I could demonstrate exactly what Anne describes with one of my all-time favourite Brexit stories, which you have heard probably 466 times. Anyone want to have a guess at which one it is? Here's Thomas Watts in the meantime with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:35, and of course the headline writers are going to reach for the ghost train merchants, not for the speak you wait people. So expect to see the word surrender in a lot of headlines. It's lazy and it's damaging to the electorate, damaging to the population, and it is a denial of the diminishment of our country. But on average, your average headline writer doesn't care about that. Here is Daniel Hannan writing about ball gags and gimp suits. Here's Kemi Badenoch writing about betrayal or rule takers, not rule breakers. Here's Nigel Farage talking about betrayal. None of them being asked to actually provide detail to put flesh upon the bones of their rhetoric. But headline writers reach for words like surrender and betrayal. Do you know why? Because we're very simple animals. And if someone tells you that you are involved in a surrender or a betrayal, your emotional response will be greater than it would if someone was explaining to you how negotiations work and what a quid pro quo is. No, betrayal. No, surrender. It's pathetic, but it's also supremely comprehensible. And it's all about the ecosystem. So briefly, Steve and Rob up next. Briefly. And this story really matters because you might not have understood exactly the point Anne was making. I think she made it perfectly, but just in case there was any room left. This is how it happens. This is how it happens at the BBC, right? This is still unbelievable. It's even more unbelievable than that woman you just heard on Question Time talking about bananas. And again, I see her as a woman to whom something has been done. No one was born with a brain that operates in that fashion. It's been done to us. So, I'm working. I did some shifts at the BBC a few years ago, right in the aftermath of Brexit, and I'm preparing to present Newsnight one night. And it's in the middle of that mad period where everyone was talking about the World Trade Organization, and the people talking about it the most were, in the classic traditions of Brexit, the people who understood it the least. People like saying, let's go WTO. People were cheering it. They had it on placards. Let's go WTO. No deal is better than a bad deal. All of the usual nonsense, all of the usual mince, right? And Pascal Lamy was in town, former Director General of the World Trade Organization. I think in the context of the BBC's dereliction of duty, and also crucially the creation of the ecosystem in which something as crazy as this could happen on the BBC, I think this is my favourite Brexit anecdote of all. So Pascal Lamy's in town, and I think, well, that's great. Let's get him in the studio for as long as we possibly can, and I just want to quiz him. He actually knows. He is a former Director General of the World Trade Organization, an organization most of us have probably never heard of, but the fact is it has become the central rallying point for the latest stage of the Brexit discussions, the Brexit shenanigans. We need to know exactly what the World Trade Organization is, exactly what the World Trade Organization does, and exactly how plausible, feasible, desirable it would be to have no trade deal in place whatsoever with anyone, of course, because everything that we had in place prior to 2016 was as a member of the European Union. So we'll tear it all up. We'll tear absolutely everything up and start again. And we'll be absolutely fine operating under World Trade Organization rules until we start signing all these magnificent new deals. And he is probably the best qualified man on the planet to talk to us about these issues. On the planet. So we're having a production meeting, talking about what I'm likely to ask Pascal Lamy, what we got, and then someone reminds me, someone pipes up and says, of course, we'll have to get someone on from the other side. And I said, pardon? What is the other side? You've got the former Director General of the World Trade Organization talking about the World Trade Organization. What's the other side? Who are you going to get on to tell the former Director General of the World Trade Organization that he doesn't really understand the World Trade Organization, but you, from the other side, you do? Do we really have to get... And that's the point that Anne was making. Because upstairs at the BBC, they decided, yes, we do have to get someone on every single time. We have to have two sides. Maitlis called it the Minford paradigm when it involved economists. 99% of the world's economists could see that Brexit was a disaster, but they found one or two down the back of the sofa who were prepared to come on the telly and claim that it would all be brilliant. And they got on to every single show, and they looked like 50% of the argument. They looked like an equal and opposite force. So I'm sitting there saying, well, who are you going to get? Maybe you've got a rogue. You've got another ex-Director General of the WTO who disagrees with Lamy. No. So you've got someone who knows more about the WTO than the former Director General of the WTO. This is Brexit and the BBC in a nutshell. And it's still not understood widely enough, including by lots of people still at the BBC. So we've got Pascal Lamy, Director General of the World Trade Organization, and we need to get someone on to tell the other side of the World Trade Organization story. And so I said, who? Who have you booked? And do you know what they said? No criticism of them, by the way. I know that only obeying orders isn't really a defence, but it was a lot more complicated than that. Do you know who they said? Pascal Lamy, Director General of the World Trade Organization. And here, to explain why he's wrong about the World Trade Organization is... Wait for it. Andrea Leadsom. Andrea Leadsom. And she accepted the invitation. That's the thing, looking back, I find so extraordinary about so much of this. But it's not extraordinary when you remember callers like Richard a moment ago, an hour ago. I've got very, very strong opinions, and I'm not embarrassed to admit I don't understand anything because I'm not an expert or a politician. Well, Andrea Leadsom doesn't understand anything either, and she's not only possessed of very strong opinions, she's got the confidence to come on Newsnight and somehow, quote, debate, end quotes, the former Director General of the World Trade Organization of what the World Trade Organization actually is, does, and represents. It's not even arrogance. I know a bit about arrogance. I don't know what it is. It's delusional. Yes, of course I'll come in and talk to you about... And so I talked to Pascal, lovely bloke, and he answers all of my questions with detail and evidence. I think you can find this on YouTube. And then I have to do this thing. I have to turn in my chair having listened to the former Director General of the World Trade Organization giving us a pretty good thumbnail sketch of exactly what it is the World Trade Organization does, is and represents, and I have to spin in my chair to Andrea Leadsom and I have to go, Andrea, you disagree. How was that allowed to happen? Not just how was that allowed to happen, how did that become normal? It would be like having somebody on the biggest news programmes in the country arguing that the earth is flat. Andrea, you disagree. David Attenborough's just explained to us his confidence in the assertion that the earth is actually round, is spherical. Andrea Leadsom's here now to tell us why he's wrong. And she started trying to tell him why he was wrong. And he caught my eye, Lammy. And the director included this because everyone knew how awful it was. There's just no one prepared to make a stand against it. And Lammy does the curly-whirly cuckoo thing with his head while Leadsom's talking. Curly-whirly cuckoo. Because that's what we look like. And I've got a horrible feeling that we still do. And when the headline writers, with their stupid use of the word surrender or betrayal or whatever it is that's going to get the most clicks, that's going to put the most bums on seats, that's going to sell the most tickets for the ghost train, that's going to whip up the embers of ignorant anger once again, and they'll be doing it already and they'll be doing it tomorrow. That's what we look like. Curly-whirly cuckoo. A whole country brought to that by spivs, liars, charlatans and conmen. Many of whom, like Andrea Leadsom, have been actively rewarded with gongs and titles and things for their loyalty to a lie, for their passionate commitment to mind-bending stupidity. And today, Keir Starmer's job is to try to undo some of it. And they will be lining up to attack him. The arsonists who are now throwing bricks at the fire engines. I don't even know if we're at the rebuilding stage yet. Maybe fire engines is the last chapter. We're the fire engines, the two journalists in the country who've told you the truth about all this. Throwing bricks at the fire engines, and now Keir Starmer started trying to rebuild the house and they're throwing bricks at him as well. And that'll be your headlines. 11:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:48 and you are listening to Groundhog Day on LBC, where it was on Thursday that we noted the presence of the words Brexit, fish and Brussels on the front page of the Financial Times. I asked you, in fact, for most of that morning, why it was that the people who claim to care passionately about our fishing industry had had absolutely nothing to say about them for the best part of a decade, since all of the promises that they made in order to get their ludicrous Brexit project over the line had turned to absolute dust. Well, they're not silent now. They're bleating about betrayal and surrender and the rest of it. And, as you'd expect from supporters of Brexit, completely ignoring reality, completely ignoring gravity, completely ignoring the truth. 11:49 is the time. A slight change of pace now. I've made some interesting friends over the years that I've been doing this job, some expected and some unexpected. And every now and then one of them asks me to do them a little favour in the context of a cause they're supporting. And I can't do all of them, but I can do some. And I'm delighted to tell you that we are supporting the actor Charlie Dale, who you will know from Casualty and Coronation Street and Emmerdale, on what is, to him, and I hope soon to you, a very important cause. And Charlie joins me on the line now. What are you doing, mate, and why are you doing it?
Can you hear me, sir?
Loud and clear, Charlie, loud and clear.
Fantastic. Where am I? I am halfway between Haverfordwest and Llandovery at the moment. On the side of the road.
You've pulled over, I should make clear. You've pulled over on a rather large motorbike because you're embarked upon an epic bike ride to support two leading brain charities. In whose memory are you doing this?
I'm doing it in the memory of one of my oldest mates, who was a lovely man called Sean Griffith, who had about 8 months what can only be described as a minor domestic accident. He slipped on the stairs, but unfortunately that meant that about 7 days later they turned off his life support. and he passed away sadly. And I couldn't make sense of it. He was a fit, healthy, lovely guy. You know, when you get to my age, you sort of experience loss generally, but on this case, I couldn't do it. So I wondered what I could do. So I spoke to Sean's family, and they were fully behind it. And basically, I am visiting 100 motorcycle cafes in under 30 days and raising money for Headway, which is the Brain Injury Association, and the Brain Tumour Research, which is another charity that I've had contact with for several years.
What's the difference between a motorcycle cafe and a normal cafe?
It's usually full of bikers.
I had no idea there was still at least 100 of them around.
Oh gosh, yes, they're all over the place. I mean, you know, they go from a little butty wagon. I started this morning at my friend Haley's butty wagon, which is at Carew Cheriton, which is just outside Tenby, and I shall be going to Bike Shed, hopefully, with Mr. Alfie Bow at some point, which is the largest, fantastic, most hipster groove place you've ever been to.
Well, you say that, Charlie. I get around, mate. I don't know. That might be a bit of a... You mentioned Tenby. That, of course, is your hometown, and also Sean's. And he was deputy mayor of Tenby. I learned this morning.
No,
you're deputy mayor of Tenby. No, you're deputy mayor of Tenby.
Yes, I have somewhat retired from deputy mayorship these days because I've just become an ambassador for Brain Tumour Research.
That's fantastic.
So basically, I stepped away from that, and another lovely guy has taken over.
So how many hours a day are you going to spend in the saddle?
Average about 5 or 6 hours a day. I'm trying to do 4 or 5 cafes a day. I'm doing a coastal route as near I can around England and Wales. I would have gone to Scotland, but the cafes are too far apart. So they're they're kind of like 2.5 hours apart. So that kind of spoils the 4 a day vibe. So I'm sort of going all the way up the west coast, across from Penrith to Newcastle, and then down all through, obviously, Norfolk and Suffolk, south coast, Devon and Cornwall, back up the top, up back into Birmingham, Stratford, and then back into the valleys, down through Cardiff, and work my way home.
And how can people... Do we know how much you're trying to raise, or is it in the lap of the gods?
It is in the lap of the gods. The charities are hoping to raise about £50,000. You can follow me on Instagram, and if you go on the Headway or the Brain Tumour Research websites, they will point you to the Give Star page, where you can put your phone over a marvellous QR code, and it will all do marvellous things.
Final question, Charlie. What are you going to have? Because I'm a bit worried that if you're going to stop off in 4 cafes a day, but by the time you get to journey's end, you might need a 3-wheeler.
Well, I had a plan, which was scrambled eggs on toast for breakfast, and then tea for the rest of the day. But I was speaking last night to a friend of mine who is a expert, a nutritionist and fitness guru, and he said, if you fast, he said, if you don't have anything after 9 o'clock and you don't have anything till a lovely big brunch at 12 o'clock, he said you'll actually lose weight. So that might be a plan, because I could certainly do with losing a few pounds.
Well, watch this space. Charlie, good luck, mate. Stay safe and happy biking. Lots of love to you, Charlie Dale there, and just embarked in the last few hours upon this 30-day Sean's TT 100 challenge. You'll probably see him, and I know the biking community. I learnt this actually when one of the hairy bikers passed away, and his family and friends did an extraordinary nationwide convoy, effectively. It's an incredibly loving and supportive community of people. So good luck with that. And mentioning the 2 charities, Brain Tumour Research, as you may know, I lost a very, very good friend to a brain tumour not long ago, and Headway, the Brain Injury Association, or you can find Charlie Dale on Instagram and donate in that way. It is 11:55. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're expecting the 12:30 press conference. Until then, we are essentially enjoying a touch of the Groundhog Days, with the strange realisation that everything has changed with regard to Brexit and nothing has changed I don't know what we do about that. Steve's in Selby. Steve in North Yorkshire. What would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Steve.
I'm sorry I seem to keep calling you these days.
That's all right.
I was triggered, if that's the right word, this morning by references to having compassion for those who voted for Brexit, and in particular for those who promoted and brought it about. For me, it's always been and remains intensely personal. So in 2014, I fell in love with Sardinia. If you remember, I called you from Sardinia a few weeks ago. I fell in love with Sardinia, and I managed to scrape enough money together to buy an apartment there. And now I can't use it as much as I want to. I continually have to be counting how many days have I been in Europe, and will I be overstaying my 90 days in 180 that I'm allowed. I can't go now until September. I can't go. So, for me, I remain absolutely furious about this, and I struggle to have any compassion for those people who voted for it. I feel they betrayed me. They ripped my European citizenship from me. That's how I feel about it. So how can I feel compassion for them? And in particular, how can I feel compassion for those idiots who continue to promote it?
That is a much less controversial flex. I think people who are contrite about what they did, or people who are clear about the scale of the con that they endured, do deserve an element of compassion because of the effort that was put into persuading them to act against their own interests, and of course yours. But those still flogging it are despicable, I think, is the only word I could think of. What do you say, though, to people who aren't particularly moved by your plight? I am. I think you've worked very hard all your life, and you've had a very large element of your plans turned upside down. But if they were able to point at things that we had somehow secured, then you could have chalked up your inconvenience as a price that the, quotes, country, end quotes, pays in order to achieve X, Y, and Z. The problem is that none of us can think of anything that we've actually gained as a trade-off to the things that we have lost. In your case, your elements of your Sardinian dream. Is there anything? I mean, you could, of course, marry a Sardinian, but I'm not aware of your marital status.
No, I'm married. And for personal reasons, I can't go and live there. I could get residency in Italy, but for family reasons, I can't.
Oh, and you can't do both like you could before. So, if we were to be super generous to the people we're discussing, have they got anything which makes up for the fact that you've lost what you've lost?
I've never seen anything that we've gained as a result, no. What we have gained is being ridiculous. I speak to my neighbours out there who are German and French, and they laugh at me. I try to explain to them that I have to go back to the UK now because I've run out of days.
Yeah.
And they look at me as if I'm some sort of lunatic. And they say, people voted for that?
Yeah.
You gave this up? They sit there for 6 months and then they wander back to Germany or France and then they wander off to somewhere else. And we gave that up. This freedom of movement, which has become a swear word almost.
Yes.
But it was so precious.
And I mean, just when things can't get any madder, they're complaining today on the front page of the Express about the Prime Minister selling out our Brexit freedoms. So you are literally describing the abolition of a massive freedom, and the people on the other side of the argument are somehow trying to claim that argument for themselves. It's surreal.
Absolutely. And even when he's got, we hope, some bit of it back for the under-30s, they see that as a bad thing. It's a return to freedom of movement.
down with
it's a
freedom,
step.
down with movement.
Yeah.
Lewis makes an excellent point on Blue Sky this morning. Lewis Goodall describes the unbelievable condescension we're already seeing today towards working class people, suggesting that they don't travel to Europe or that their kids might not want to go to university or study in Europe. He says it's quite something to behold. Stay in your lane is an increasingly universal view across much of British politics, and one which is somehow presented as inherently virtuous. He's right, isn't he?
Absolutely. I'm working class. I'm a council house lad from Leeds. Single parent family, council house lad from Leeds. I've worked all my life. I'm working class. I go to Europe. I love Europe. I love the European people. And
your life is richer for it. So we should be evangelizing about that rather than pigeonholing and, as Lewis quite rightly says, condescending about people who don't immediately appear to be the kinds of people who might have a little place in Tuscany or an apartment in Sardinia. Steve, thank you. It is 1 minute after 12.
James O'Brien on LBC.
5 minutes after 12 is the time. It's back. Brexit back on the agenda, back at the top of the news as well. For how long? Only time will tell. But we'll talk shortly to Dmitry Grozoubinski, who has become our go-to man for matters international trade shortly. Some breaking news for you. I was reading something during the news bulletin, so you may have heard this already. It has been confirmed, as many expected, that Gary Lineker will be leaving the BBC a little sooner than planned. I was before we go to Dmitry, I just a word of admiration for Gary Lineker. I completely believe that when he posted images, an image of a rat, he didn't realise that it had a anti-Semitic context. And the reason why I believe that is because I didn't know about the history of rats in racist tropes until 2015. When the Daily Mail, a cartoonist on the Daily Mail called Mac, published a photograph, oddly enough, going back to the days leading up to Brexit. And he published a cartoon which showed a sign saying, "Welcome to Europe, our open borders and the free movement of people." And it showed people crossing the border, most of whom were in silhouette and designed to look Middle Eastern. One wearing sandals, but the silhouettes of bearded men with guns, clearly designed to conjure up certain images. But crucially, there were also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rats in the cartoon that were also scurrying across this particular border, the border being the border into Europe. So I hadn't realised until some people pointed out how hideous that cartoon was, that rats had this kind of historic resonance. It has been present since Samuel Earhart did a cartoon in 1909, which portrayed all immigrants quite explicitly as vermin. And then, as has often been the case with disgusting demagoguery, the Nazis bought into it entirely. Der Stürmer, which was Nazi Germany's most influential propaganda sheet, had a cover image, a cartoon on its cover, depicting a Nazi actually gassing Jewish rats that were huddled around the base of a tree. They wrote, "When the vermin are dead, the German oak will flourish once more." So there's a long history of rats being associated with immigration in general, or with latterly with anti-Semitism. But given that cartoon slapped me round the back of the head when I first saw it, I completely... And also, knowing the level of scrutiny you get when you're a contributor to public discourse like Gary Lineker, there's no way on earth he would have done that knowingly. And as soon as he was made aware of what had happened, he took down the post. But it has nonetheless apparently accelerated his departure from the BBC, which just highlights a point I've made to you many, many times. And that is this: if you are going to be critical of Israel in public in the United Kingdom, even as they continue to visit unspeakable atrocities on the people of the Gaza Strip, you have to be more careful than you do in almost any context I can think of, ever, historically. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is entirely up to you. But I just thought that was a helpful little moment of proof. And the effort put into going after someone like Gary Lineker long before this episode occurred is absolutely immense. One of the finest footballers we've had on the international stage and one of the greatest broadcasters of his generation. But in the end, not able to evade the calling for cancellation from various voices. So there it is. 9 minutes after 12 is the time. Dmitry Grozoubinski, as you know, is, well, he's our trade man, isn't he? And he joins me on the line now. We've seen some embargoed information. It was unembargoed at 12 noon, so we're not breaking any confidences. We have a rough idea, or a clearer idea now than we did earlier, of what has actually been pinned down. Is it a trade deal?
I mean, it's a deal that has trade elements, certainly. It is a deal where the two sides have exchanged commitments on how trade will work across the border, and it has elements that look like they will make it easier to sell goods to one another. So it's a trade deal as far as I'm concerned. It's not necessarily, we don't have the text yet, so we don't know if it's a sort of legally binding treaty or a little bit like what happened with the US, whether it's just the leaders have agreed on a couple of key outcomes and the details will be worked out now or soon. But it's a trade deal as far as I'm concerned.
And the biggest bit of that is the SPS agreement, I think.
I think that we, now having seen the sort of unembargoed text, there's a couple of really big bits on it. So first is the SPS agreement, certainly. So for those who don't know, the UK and EU, when you move goods across the border, you have to not only meet their standards, but prove that your goods meet their standards. And after Brexit, after leaving the single market, that became significantly more expensive and annoying, especially for UK businesses selling into Europe, because the UK waived and kind of dilly-dallied on implementing checks, whereas the EU did not. This agreement, to some extent, and we don't know how much yet, will make that process easier and less expensive, which will make UK goods more competitive in Europe. So that is one big thing it does. But I would also not sleep on the linking of the emissions trading schemes, because that will be huge as well.
Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. So a concern that Europe and the UK and others have had for a while is that we are pricing our own carbon, which makes it more expensive to produce in the UK or EU in carbon-intensive sectors. But it also creates an incentive to simply make things abroad and then sell them back to Europe and EU, which kind of which is bad for the environment and bad for our jobs and businesses. So something that the European Union is doing is putting in place a carbon border adjustment tax that says that if you don't have a carbon tax or a carbon price in your country and you try to sell us something that's energy intensive, we're going to work out at the border how much you would have paid in carbon tax had you made it in Europe, and we're going to charge that to you. And that is a massive compliance headache. It's a massive cost headache. What this deal seems to have done is linked or agreed to link the emission trading schemes in the UK and Europe, which will not have a bunch of benefits, but it should open the door to saying that anything made in the UK is considered to have paid a carbon tax already. There's no need to prove anything else, and you dodge that massive headache at the border that will only get worse as the EU rolls in more carbon price and more carbon border measures.
But we also see on a sort of more day-to-day dealings for ordinary people who aren't in import and export, the e-gates in Europe are going to kick in, which should see some of those hideous queues diminished. Pets will be able to travel more easily with pet passports for UK cats and dogs, and the animal health certificates will no longer be needed for every trip. Does that form part of the quid pro quo? People go in with a sense of what they want commercially and economically, but they know that some of the counters that they will play at the negotiating table, Dmitry, have very little to do with commerce or with the economy.
Absolutely. I mean, trade agreements have been growing in scope for a while, but importantly, this particular discussion started off as far larger than trade. Keir Starmer and von der Leyen in the EU were talking about defense. They were talking about immigration and refugee flows. They were talking about trade too, and that was part of the equation. But this was always going to be a larger package. And that's why I think negotiators did sit down around the table and went, where this deal looks unbalanced, what more can we think of in ways we could collaborate to give each other things that will make life easier or things that are just desirable.
I see. I've got it. And should we do the F word or not?
God, which one?
Fishing.
There
is only one.
Oh
no, there's at least two. Sorry, I apologise. No, I mean fishing.
I thought I was once again being propositioned on UK national radio, and we can discuss that offline, James. No, so the EU kind of had a problem, which is that one of the things it was able to strong-arm Boris Johnson into doing at the very last minute in order to get the free trade deal he got across the line was to agree a fishing agreement that gave the EU a relatively generous amount of access that would have expired in 2026 to UK waters. Now, the EU has always wanted that. The UK position has been, after 2026, we will negotiate that every year. At the start of every year, we determine how much access you get. For the EU, that was a real problem, because they're not going to have the kind of leverage they have back when Boris Johnson was negotiating, or this time every year. And every year it's going to be an uncertainty, and the UK could simply take away some of the fishing rights. So a big card the UK had to play is that the EU wanted long-term certainty, and the UK appears to have given it to them for quite a while. I think it's 12 years, by extending that Boris Johnson deal, which probably explains why the EU then moved on a lot of things the UK wanted, such as those health checks at the border.
I mean, you make it sound like a sober, and as you say, until we see the actual ink dry and know how much is legally binding and how much is still in the realms of we're nearly there, you make it sound like a sober and largely successful exercise for both sides.
I think so. I mean, I think certainly this was a choice between interests, right? Even within the fishing industry, if the EU continues to have access, that's more fish they can catch in UK waters, which is probably bad for UK fishing. On the other hand, now UK fresh fish might have an easier time making it to market in the EU. So for some parts of the UK fishing industry, that might be good. This is a choice between competing priorities. It seems like a vaguely balanced one, and it seems like both sides got a lot of what they wanted. And I think that's in 2025, I'll settle for any conversation between friends that ends without anyone throwing anything.
Well, yeah, except there'll be plenty of people throwing things from the sidelines, and we find ourselves once again in the realms of public rhetoric, public discourse, media coverage being a million miles away from the actual reality that you have just described to us.
Absolutely, and this has been the problem from the beginning in a lot of trade agreements. There will definitely be things in here that, if you pluck them out, especially if you strip them of context or present them in a demagogic way, will inflame. Yes, I know. Will inflame sort of passions and make people feel like they've been sold up the river. Especially, as I said, if you strip them out of the context of all of the things they were traded for. There is plenty of room for passionate debate on this, but again, I would just urge everybody who is listening to people talking about this deal to demand that they articulate exactly what the situation was before, exactly what's changing, and why they think that is the end of Albion and Western civilization.
Dmitry Grozoubinski, many thanks indeed. As ever, steering an incredibly helpful and illuminating course through quite choppy waters. Dmitry, if you don't know, is the founder of Explain Trade and the author of the book Why Politicians Lie About Trade and What You Need to Know About It, which was nestling on one of the tables on the way into Waterstones the other day. So it's reaching parts that other trade experts cannot reach. 12:18 is the time. Press conference due at 12:30. Given what we've just shared with you regarding previously embargoed detail and information, I expect it to be on schedule, which means I've almost certainly just jinxed it.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 12 is the time. I've got the full statement from Gary Lineker about his decision to step down from the BBC a little earlier than planned. as a consequence of that unfortunate Instagram post that he made last week. I will play that to you shortly, but I'm going to just speak to Marie in Woking first, because she's been on hold for quite a long time. And I want to know what she has to say. Marie, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Thank you for letting me say a few words. I've been getting more and more nervous, because no way in God's earth would I ever ring up and talk about politics. I know very little. I'm not very clever about politics. Your last speaker I thought was marvellous. So I'm really ringing to face the gentleman who said he had no compassion for people who voted Brexit.
Right.
I'm 87. I remember going into the common market all those years ago, and in my simple way, like a lot of people, expected all sorts of wonderful things to happen. Oh, I don't know, cheap wine from France, simple things like that. Nothing happened, and I don't remember any good things about it. Okay, as knowing more about politics, you probably could tell me what there was, but I can't remember it being wonderful. So I am
But I mean, just very briefly, there would be the duty on alcohol is imposed by the UK government. So everything that made its way into the United Kingdom from Europe that had previously been subject to duties or tariffs suddenly became what we would call duty free. So there was loads of, but anyway, as you say,
because you're making me feel even more guilty.
No, don't say. Okay, go on.
I am contrite and I am embarrassed. But that, and also, nobody told us much about it. My darling husband, who was cleverer than me, would have helped me out, but I haven't got him, bless him. And, I'm losing the plot now.
No, you're not. You're just, I think you're highlighting very much how easy it was to just...
To do it, because nobody told us about it. And, I mean, if politicians spoke, they obviously took their slant on it. So you didn't really get an unbiased opinion about it. I mean, my grandchildren all castigated me because, of course, they're all coming up to wanting to travel and everything else. So, yes, I am embarrassed. I
don't think you need to be. As we've said all morning.
I don't want compassion, by the way.
No, that can be a bit patronising, can it?
Yeah, a little bit,
yes. I did worry about that.
Absolutely. But, and as I say, I wouldn't have dreamt of phoning you. You're such a clever man to talk about politics. Seriously. I mean, I listen with great interest
to
all the talks, and I'm intelligent enough to understand them, but I'm certainly not intelligent enough to discuss them.
Well, I think you've just disproved that. I think you've just made that clear. But yeah, and the lesson to take away for all of us is I suppose, not to take anything on trust, especially not from people with the loudest voices.
Absolutely. In a word, absolutely.
In a word. Thank you, Marie. You've cheered me right up.
Thank you very much for letting me get that off my chest.
Well, I'm glad you have. And yes, I will not patronise you with my compassion, but I will thank you for your contrition. There we go. Even a bit of alliteration in there at the end. 23 minutes after 12. Here is Gary Lineker's full statement. I mean, it's a mark of what a massive broadcaster he is, that his decision to leave a job he was scheduled to leave already actually is not only leading in news bulletins up and down the country, but also merits a sort of piece to camera, as we call them, a sort of monologue explaining himself, which he's always been perfectly happy to do, actually. He's always perfectly happy to explain himself. Anyway, here it is.
Hi everyone, some personal news. Last week I shared a post here on Instagram that contained an emoji that has awful connotations. Unfortunately, I did not see the emoji. If I had, I would never ever have shared it. The minute I was made aware, I quickly deleted the post and went on to make an apology. I would like once again to say I'm sorry unreservedly for the hurt and upset caused. It was a genuine mistake and oversight, but I should have been more diligent. I know that. I've stood up for minorities and humanitarian issues and against all forms of racism all of my life, including, of course, anti-Semitism, which I absolutely abhor. There's no place for it and never should be. So I think it's best for all concerned that I step down from BBC presenting duties altogether and not do next season's FA Cup or World Cup. The final day of the Premier League season on Sunday will be my last show. It's been a pleasure and a huge privilege working with the BBC for 30 years, especially hosting Match of the Day, a programme that is so close to my heart and an integral part of my life. I'd like to thank all of the quite brilliant, talented and lovely people, both in front and behind the camera, that I've worked alongside for 3 decades. You're at absolute best. The relationship with the BBC has been long and wonderful, but it's the right time for the organisation and myself to go our separate ways. Thank you also to all of you for your incredible support and love over so many years. It means the world to me. I'll see you all on Sunday.
Gosh, end of an era. It really is. And absolutely, for anyone of my age, the way that Gary Lineker runs through both football and subsequently football journalism is, I think, unique. I know Jimmy Hill played in goal about, or did he play in goal? I know Jimmy Hill played a bit, but he didn't play at anything like the level that Gary Lineker played at. To have been pretty much on top of both of those games is an extraordinary achievement. And this is an unfortunate early end. I believe him. Again, I thought that he, in a million years, would not have posted that image if he had either known it was there or known what it means, and he appears not even to have noticed it, which is very easily done. I praised something on air near the outbreak of or shortly after the terror attacks, didn't I? And I hadn't watched the clip to the end. I can't remember which one it was, but before I'd even got upstairs to the office, people were ringing in, and journalists were ringing in asking if I'd done this thing. I just watched till the joke came, the punch. I can't even remember what it was, but I didn't watch beyond the punchline. And the person who'd made rather a good joke said something pretty unsavoury a little later in the same clip. But I think I'd apologise for it on air even before I got off air. It's just a highlight of how careful you have to be. And whether you think this is an overreaction or not is entirely up to you. But goodness me, doesn't it show you how hard it is in the United Kingdom to hold a public position? And remember, he's never been paid for his political opinions. That is not popular with right-wing media. I mean, it is that simple. Not defending what he's done most recently, but goodness me, we've had 5-10 years, is it, of seeing Gary Lineker being publicly pilloried by the most powerful media voices in the country. I've seen some of them, by the way, cozy up to him. At Showbiz Dues, some of the people who've got the nastiest things to say about him are desperate for a little bit of the razzmatazz to rub off on them if they encounter him at a charity event or something like that. But that's their hypocrisy. It's not his problem. But goodness me, what a remarkable indictment it is of public discourse in this country, that someone who's managed to build a platform powerful enough to reach parts that hardly anyone else could reach comes under almost infinite and constant attack for daring to speak up in defence of minorities, refugees, or other human beings. There it is. As I say, I quite possibly the right decision, given the context of that rap, but I don't remember anybody calling for the cartoonist at the Daily Mail to go, or if they did, he didn't, when he deployed a cartoon containing several rats, and in the very convenient context of European Union borders, which we're back at today. 12:28 is the time. I can squeeze in another call. I'm keeping an eye on the screen. Are we thinking of going live, or are we going to take the news? Okay, Gary is in Salzburg. Gary, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'll be very, very quick.
Well, you don't have to be.
Well, I'll do my best. Yeah. This new rule that's been introduced about British citizens being able to use the e-gates in the European Union, I don't think that's actually going to happen, and I don't actually think it's feasible. I think it'll just cause a little bit of uproar for the EU citizens who find themselves queuing behind the British citizens because you've not got your freedom of movement back. You've still only got 90 days out of every 180, so you're still going to have your passports checked. Now, I worked at Salzburg Airport for 7 years. Yeah. Salzburg Airport has got two passport controls. It's got EU, non-EU, end. Now, if you take an example, you're on a plane full of people, 150 Brits and 5 Germans. The 5 Germans would normally walk up to passport control, showing the picture. He'd go, right, German passport, in you go, get you something in. And it would take literally seconds. Now, because you've still got this 90-day rule out of every 180...
They need a record of all the time that you've spent in Europe.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So you're still going to have your passport checked, which means that all the EU citizens who would normally just walk through with their EU passports are now going to be held up in your queue because of your decision to leave their European Union. And it's just not going to be fair.
Well, and you're a bit glass half empty. You're a bit glass half empty Gary, I'm going to call you today. Right? but you do obviously know what you're talking about. There's no middle ground here, like an e-gate that we get. So it would just be done electronically as opposed to by human beings, which isn't always the case.
No, that's not possible because, as you know yourself, you probably travel quite a bit yourself, James, as have I. I've been all over Africa, America, all over Europe.
Not as much as you, but I do okay.
But they don't stamp your passport page 1, page 2, page 3. I've got stamps on page 1. I've got stamps on page 7.
No. In October, there's a new system coming in, a new electronic system coming in October when the stamps will no longer matter. So they'll be recording the information you describe electronically. So it will address part of the problem that you've identified. It may not address all of it because you've still got an angry German behind you while you have to put your passport through the system in a way that might be different from what they have to do because they don't have to count the days that they're in the country. But it will be a little bit easier than you remember. I've been bombarded with messages saying that, literally 30 people coming on in the space of your phone call who are all making exactly the same point. The e-gates will automatically check the number of days you have stayed in the EU. So it is possible.
If they can introduce that, then all good and well.
Take the win. Take the win, Gary.
I will do.
I'm going to give me your glass. I'm just going to top it up. I'm just going to fill that glass for you. There you go. There you go. We thought, with them, and of course, that is also, like everything else, open to recalibration. Amelia Cox is here now with the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I'm going to do something I haven't done before. No, not that. I'm going to do a missing word round in which I know not whether I will actually be able to deliver the answer before the programme ends, because we will cross live to the UK-EU news conference imminently. The podia. Is that the plural of podium? What's the plural of podium, Keith? Is it podia, we think? Podiums. The podia are in place. There's 3 of them, actually, as far as I can tell. Is that 3 podia? I think so. Which means it could begin at any moment. I'll get a little bit of warning because I'll see them walking out onto the stage. But the audience is assembled. I'm going to give you a missing word round, and it may be that this news conference takes so long that you don't get to find the answer out today. And I know that happens a lot, but on this occasion it would actually not be because I'd forgotten. Are you ready for this? Hackers could turn your smart toaster into a blank. Hackers could turn your smart toaster into a blank. And it's odd that toasters are in the news because I think I used the toaster when I used to tell you about the shiny box with a toaster on the front of it that lots of people bought in 2016. But then when they got it home and opened it, it turned out that they actually bought a breeze block. And then the population divided pretty quickly, didn't it? Into people who were furious that they'd ended up handing over their vote in return for a breeze block, and they were very cross with the people who told them it would be a shiny new toaster. There were plenty of people who claimed that actually they'd known and wanted a breeze block all along, and they hadn't fallen for the shiny toaster or indeed the big red bus that was being punted by all the usual suspects. And then you sort of had people who just perhaps sat with their decision for a while in a state of benign confusion. I just bought a toaster. Why have I ended up with a breeze block? And today, of course, Keir Starmer is in the business of trying to undo some of the damage done in that moment. 12:36 is the time. Bill's in Chester. Bill, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good to be with you.
Likewise.
Yeah, just a quickie. I don't know if you've seen the film Don't Look Up.
I have.
But I'm just reminded, you have? I'm just reminded what you've been saying all morning. James, has it not ever been thus? You've talked before about Northcliffe in the 1930s. Was he not saying don't look up? Lord Halifax in the Commons in 1940 saying don't look up. In America, almost half those who voted for Trump, all the evidence says you were idiots, but they're saying don't look up. James, is it not always the way?
Kind of. I mean, you're describing Churchill's warnings, really, about the imminent arrival of the of Nazis. But what Northcliffe was also doing in the 30s, the owner of the Daily Mail, for people who don't know, was encouraging his readers to be very cross about what were described in his pages as alien Jews coming into the country from Germany unchecked. So, and Don't Look Up is about an environmental threat to the world that somehow the population contrives to choose to ignore in the hope that it would just go away. So I don't quite see why it's the same as this conversation.
In that film, the people who didn't look up got very angry and huge animosity towards those who chose to look up.
Of course. Yes, that is exactly that.
That's what's happening in America. That's what's happening in Israel. That's what's happening here. And I'm just saying this because they're in my lifetime, but I get the feeling this has been happening through history, James.
'Twas ever thus, Bill. 'Twas ever thus. I think you're right. I mean, you're describing the power of the demagogue. You're describing the seductive nature of snake oil, and you're describing why the queue for the ghost train is always much longer than the queue for your speak your weight machine. And listen, we continue to try to offer some antidote to that poison on this programme, and I'm not the only one. There just aren't as many of us as you might hope, and there certainly aren't as many of us as you might expect from the way that right-wing media never stops complaining or moaning about voices that it can't control, or voices that are not of a piece with their own output. It's a funny one, that. It's an area of almost endless fascination. Make a list now of people in the UK media with really big platforms who, for example, were opposed to Brexit, or who have turned out to be right about Brexit. So you need to be paid. So that's Gary Lineker off the page, and Carol Vorderman as well. You need to be paid for your political opinions, and you were correct about Brexit, or you were simply opposed to it for obvious reasons. And now make a list of all the people with big platforms in the UK media who have opposed Brexit and been proved right and get paid for their political opinions. And now measure that platform for me, if you would. How big is that platform? How many of them are there on that list? And how big is the platform? Now do the opposite. Now do all the broadcasters, or the commentators, or the pundits, or the newspaper columnists, the newspaper editors, the newspaper owners, the people who pop up on paper reviews, the people who are offering a punditry position on variety of programmes. Now make a list of all of the people that get paid for their opinions who have been pro-Brexit, and measure their platforms, and then just compare the two totals. There's a total number of people paid for their opinions who've been pro-Brexit and therefore wrong about everything, House of Lords, and therefore wrong about everything, and then the people on the other side. No, and even Gary Lineker, I know he's no longer, he's dropping off the BBC early, but he wouldn't have been on that category because he only had Twitter, and look how much they hated him just for that, just for being very popular and having a big platform. But that was voluntary. Anyway, time now for the news conference.
James O'Brien on LBC.